The critics of Marx are as old as Marx. The critics of Marxism are as old as Marxism. By the way, the critics of capitalism are just as old as capitalism. And if you want a guarantee of the future of socialism and Marxism, here's what it is. As long as we got capitalism, it's going to do what it has always done, which is to provoke the critics. We won't soon have another Marx. That's a tall order. But we've had a lot of folks get pretty close. And more of them are coming, I can assure you. All right, so the critics have always done a variety of things. So let's go through, 2 or 3 of them. Does Marx emphasize class struggle? Yes. Does Marx want to stress the role of the material reality, the hard facts of life, feeding yourself, clothing yourself, sheltering yourself, as being somehow more important than the ideological? In German, Bertolt Brecht captured this. By the way, if you're familiar with Brecht, he was a Marxist. Many of the people that Americans, particularly intellectuals, admire and follow get sanitized by the peculiar mentality of Americans, so that you appreciate them cleansed of their Marxism, as if the Marxism wasn't part of it. Bertolt Brecht is arguably one of the greatest writers of theater in the last century or two. He's a Marxist, always was, committed to Marxism from the beginning. And he has wonderful lines, one of them in German. Erst kommt das Fressen, dann kommt die Moral. In English, first you have to eat something, then we can discuss morality. In other words, the profundity of real life shapes the thinking.
Material facts first.
Yeah, materialism determines ideas, not the other way around. Or we must turn Hegel on his head, the idea being Hegel thought ideas of the spirit is what's real, and it shapes our delusion about material reality, which is governed. It's not so far from Christian ideas that in the beginning, God made everything. A spiritual entity produced the material reality we all live in, us included. So why does Marx stress it? The answer, and Marx gives this answer himself, part of the reason that kind of a criticism survives is that the people who make it are so unfamiliar with Marx's work that it doesn't seem to dawn on them that this criticism that they've just figured out might have been figured out by others before them. And some of those others might have confronted either Marx or Marxists after him with that idea and gotten some response, so that before you throw the criticism out again, avoid being embarrassed by having someone, like me, for example, have to explain to you painfully that Marx himself responded to that criticism. You don't have to agree with him, but don't quite present your criticism as if it were this sharp new insight when it's an old, dull, and dead insight. All right, here we go. Marx responds by saying, literally almost in these words, Engels and I, my partner and I, may be appropriately criticized for having overstressed the material relative to the ideal. Let us explain to you why we did that. We didn't do it because the material is more important than the ideal. That idea is silly. We did it because we live in a culture that overstates the reverse. and to push back against the idealism that governs. The religious kind, God made the world, or the secular kind, Hegel's effort at a reasonable way to think of the world as fundamentally spirit. So we overstressed the other side to kind of balance the conversation. But we don't believe in the one is more important than the other. That's an empty debate for us. It has no content that we can grasp. We think that the idea shapes the material and vice versa in a continuous process of mutual transformation. And for that complex idea, they borrowed the old world dialectic. We understand that the different aspects of life shape each other and constantly change each other, so that A changes B, which therefore alters how B impacts A, thereby changing A, which thereby alters how it affects B in a continuous process, which is not only dialectical, but which constitutes what we as human beings call history. Change. The only thing that doesn't change, Marx once quipped, is the process of change itself. And then quickly corrected, but change too changes how it works over time. So the notion that they made one the dominant over the other misunderstands what he got from Hegel, which is where that dialectic idea comes from. Yes, he overstressed it. To say the history of human history is the history of class struggle, why would you put your focus on class like that? Because it's more important than other things? No. As a Marxist, which I am and happily say so, I can assure you, I focus on class analysis. If you've read any of my books or my articles, you'll see that. Do I think class is more important than other aspects of life? Not at all. In fact, it makes no sense to me. Class is part of life. So is eating, drinking, dancing, praying, wondering, dreaming, and a million other things. I can't talk about a million other things. I would become incoherent to you and to me. So I focus on some things, like class in my case, but not because it's more important. In order for me to argue that class is more important, or for you to argue that anything else is, you'd have to show me how what you're focusing on is more important than everything else. You've never done that. That's not doable because you can't do it. And I can't either. So we focus on particular things for the reasons that shape our lives. So I focus on class, like Marx, because in my education, in the society I live in, which here in the United States is yours too, it is a lost, denied, marginalized reality. And I don't like that. And I think terrible social consequences flow from that. So I focus on class. And I find Marx really interesting because he helps me do that. But it's not that class is more important. That's a silly argument. It's like asking me, what color is Thursday? That doesn't work, folks. There is no correct answer to that question. Which is the more important factor shaping the world is another empty question. You can't do that. Nobody ever has. If you're persuaded that something is more important than something else, the important thing for you to ask is why you believe that. But to say, I'm going to prove it, I'm going to show, you can't do that. Or to say the same thing another way, and this is the answer to Karl Popper, when you explain why you focus on, I don't know, love or race or politics or class, you will make use of ways of thinking that help get you to that point. But those are always ways of thinking that started somewhere. And where you start isn't a place that you can prove you should start at. Because the only way you can explain to me why you start at a certain place is to use the analytic that you developed from the place you started at. And that would be proving something by reference to itself. And if you ever had a logic class, you got a problem here. Or to say the same thing in English, we all start from certain places. We have to start somewhere. And if we don't like the place we start, we can start somewhere else. But the notion that some of us start in the right place because it's the right place to start, that's pure dogma. There's no basis for that. Wherever you start, I can ask you why you start there. Wherever you start, I can say, you could start somewhere else. That's always true. You could. People do. Marxists start with class. You don't have to. The interesting question is, why would you? Equally interesting, why wouldn't you? You got to start somewhere. Most of us, where we start? Where our parents and our environment tell us it's appropriate to start. And that's okay. But that's not some beyond discourse place. That's the honest answer. I am what I am because of the autobiography I could take your time to present to you as to why I did that. Karl Popper's criticism in that way is useless.